and would like to get started. So, welcome everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the Know to Prevent monthly virtual speaker series. Tonight's presentation is entitled Marijuana Parenting for Prevention. Know to Prevent is a collaboration of youth-focused coalitions and agencies in Westchester working together to provide parents and caregivers with the essential tools to increase resiliency in our children and to reduce risky behaviors. For more information about the collaborative and upcoming presentations, as well as links to the recordings of previous presentations, please visit our website, knowtoprevent.org. So before we get started, a few housekeeping items. Tonight's presentation is being recorded, which will be emailed to each of you all tomorrow, along with a handout called the tip jar. The tip jar will highlight key takeaways, information, and prompts from tonight's speaker for you to have as a reference going forward. There will be a live Q&A session at the end of the presentation, and we encourage you to type any questions that you may have during the presentation into the Q&A box. One of the positives, the few positives that have emerged from the pandemic has been the widespread use of virtual platforms that has allowed us to expand our partnerships with organizations nationwide that share our common goal of supporting youth and their families. So I'm pleased to introduce Operation Parent, who brings us tonight's presentation, and will hand it over to their Director of Program Development, Mary Beth Uberti.
It's telling it to unmute. There we go. Hi, everybody. Let me get to my screen so we can share. Okay, my name is Mary Beth Uberti, and I'm with Operation Parent, and I want to thank Know to Prevent for allowing us to be here today and for the community for joining us. We have a wonderful presentation with tonight with Christine Storm from Care and Treatment Center. We have done this presentation prior. Christine joined us during the summer to do this marijuana parenting for prevention, and it was very well received. So I know that you're all going to enjoy this presentation and the information she'll have to share with you. I do want to go ahead and just talk to you briefly about Operation Parent. We are a nonprofit that we really focus on providing education, resources, and information to those raising preteens and teens. So we're all about the parents, the caregivers, anyone who's out there in the life of a preteen and teen to provide education on things such as social media, drugs, alcohol, mental health issues. So again, just like you guys are experiencing, the virtual world has lent itself to a wonderful webinar platform. And at Operation Parent, we've been hosting webinars for the past 4 years. So I just want to let you know about some of our upcoming webinars, and you are free to join into these webinars. We just asked you to register at operationparent.org, and from our main page, you just click on webinars and go ahead and sign up. Even if you cannot attend, it's okay. Sign up, because the next day you'll get the recording. So we have a couple coming up. Next week is Overcoming Teen Depression, Anxiety and Depression with Zach Westerbeck. Great presentation. He really talks a lot to the college students and to the families, but also for the high schools. His experience with anxiety, depression, what he has learned, and what he really tries to impart to those in that age group on how they can take control and work to overcome their own anxiety, and working with counselors on depression and anxiety. And then in February, we have another presenter, Arlene Bryce. She has presented for us in the past, and she'll be talking about how do you, if you have somebody who's dealing with addiction in your family, close to you, loved one, how do you navigate the system of addiction? It's a great presentation filled with, unfortunately, her story, how she had to work through dealing with her own family's, her three children that were addicted. So she's a wealth of information. She is also a coach that helps families that are going through this and provides resources to them. So please take the time to go ahead and register whenever you have the chance at operationparent.org. You can also check out our past webinars. They are there available for you to view it at your leisure. And with that, we do have our parent handbook, great handbook. We have in the handbook over 40 topics dealing with, again, the preteen and teen. You can order it online at our shop. Trends, misconceptions, and warning signs are covered on here. Just give you the information and also then point you in the great directions on where else you can go for more information. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christine, and I hope you all enjoy the presentation.
Okay, let me get this showing. All right. Hi. Thank you so much, Mary Beth and Know to Prevent. And I'm so excited to be here today. And those are, first of all, really fantastic presentations that are coming up with Operation Parent. I think I'm going to sign up for both of them because they lean so heavily into this presentation that we're going to be talking about today, right? So I'm Christine Storm. I'm the Director of Community Education for K.N.O.W. Treatment Centers. And next month will have been with Karen for 17 years, working in their prevention and early intervention wing of Karen. So our organization has been around for over 60 years. And it's one of the oldest, largest addiction treatment centers in the country. And we treat teens through older adults who have substance use disorders and other behavioral health conditions. We have our main campus is in Pennsylvania, and then we have other centers in Florida, and then regional recovery centers throughout the East Coast. My time spent at Karen has really been doing a lot of prevention education. So I have spent years in classrooms with kids, kindergarten all the way up through 12th grade, working with faculty to help them understand the role that they can play, helping them to identify signs and symptoms of substance use in the teens that they're working with, and all the different things that they can do to boost protection in kids. And then obviously the people who have the most influence over their children's decisions are the parents and caregivers. So I applaud all of you that are on today's presentation just for taking the time out of your busy schedule to make this a priority. And I'm thrilled that Carolyn is also with us today. I worked for many years in student assistance programs. I love the work that they do as an entity within the school that can be a resource to parents, that it's non-disciplinary and it's confidential. And when you're concerned about something related to your child's behavioral health, whether that's substances or something else within your family, it's a safe place to go to get help and to get resources. So that's a little bit about me, and let's dive in. So let's talk about what I'm hoping to accomplish in our hour and a half today. So here are some of the objectives. And my goal is not to tell you what to do as a parent. We all have to figure that out, and we have to do what's right within our own family values and within our own children. Like, you could have 4 kids and all 4 of them require something different. So what we're going to really try to focus on today is, what does research show can help prevent substance use disorders? So you can do everything right and still have issues that present themselves, but we are going to talk about best practices. What are some things that you can do to have conversations and knowledge around this topic? So I'm really hoping you walk away understanding the incredibly vital role that you play in preventing teen marijuana use and gaining some skills for effective conversations and setting expectations. There were some great questions that came in before the presentation today about, what age do I start these conversations? And what do I do when I'm getting pushback? And how do I have this conversation with a teen that knows it all? And I certainly don't know as much as they do. So we'll get to all of that. Hoping that you gain some knowledge about the impact that marijuana and cannabis can potentially have on your teen. So all of those reasons why we ask them to not use, or to at least delay the onset of substance use for as long as possible. So we'll just arm you with some facts, some information that you have to combat the "it's harmless, there's nothing wrong with it" feedback that you might get from your child. I'm going to help you to see some of the current drug trends. What does the cannabis of today look like? What's the drug that's in it? How does it impact the brain? What does the paraphernalia look like? What are the different methods that it's used? Where are they getting it? Okay, so hopefully we will be able to help you feel a little bit more armed with information through that section, and then identify signs and symptoms that a teen might be using marijuana, and then what you can do when concerns arise. So it's a lofty agenda, but I think we'll be able to get through quite a bit. When you do have questions today, throw them into the Q&A feature, and at times I might ask you to throw something into the chat. So, all right. I love starting presentations like this by doing a little walk down memory lane. So I'm going to ask everybody on here today to just think back a little bit to their own high school experience. So I'm not asking you to age yourself, but maybe you will recognize some of the things that I'm about to show. So when we were teens, we talked on telephones, right? If we wanted to have a conversation with a friend and we were home, we had to pick up that corded phone. And if we were making our plans to hang out with our friends on a Friday night, making those plans on the corded telephone in the kitchen, you know, it was a lot harder to get away with being sneaky until you left the house. You know, if we wanted to communicate information, it was done by word of mouth. We socialized in person a whole lot more than we do now. And oftentimes there was a lot more freedom. You maybe played outside till dark, till the light came on that lets you know it was time to come home for dinner. So there was a lot more freedom and less hovering by parents. And when it came to drugs, the top 3 drugs of choice were alcohol, nicotine, and marijuana. And guess what? Those are the same 3 drugs of choice today: alcohol, nicotine, and marijuana. However, those drugs have changed. Our nicotine was generally smoked. People knew it was bad for them, and the marijuana was weak. It's a very different experience than what we're seeing today. And this really didn't exist. If anybody wants to throw into the chat feature, and I'll be able to see it and read it out, what was the latest and greatest in technology when you were your child's age, when you were a teenager? Give you a second to throw some of those in there. Walkman, beepers. Okay. Car phones, pagers, cordless phone. Oh, fancy. Yeah, we could see all that. Atari. Awesome. I still remember playing Atari with my friends in their finished basement. Awesome. Handheld games, more Ataris, dial-up internet, and cell phone. All right, so we've obviously come a little bit of a way from those days. So let's compare this with today and the world that our young kids are growing up in. We communicate through devices, right? Just before this presentation started, I was texting my son who's in the next room, you know, threatening him that he needs to be quiet for the next hour and a half. So we communicate through devices, even within our own homes, even with our own children. Gossip, pictures, other info can be sent to many instantly, and that's a blessing and a curse, as we all know, and anybody that's concerned about bullying with their children can attest to. Social media dominates. It's where trends start. It's where young people learn about what's out there. It's where they learn about like what's kind of cool and trendy. It's where they share what they're up to. They kind of create their own persona. And it starts young. My 4th grade nephew was telling me about how out of control TikTok is with his classmates. And he's so tired. All anyone ever talks about is TikTok. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're in the 4th grade. We're spending a lot more time indoors. So this, I have an 18-year-old son, that is a very, a picture that I've seen a lot in my son's own life. So a lot of the communication and social time is happening behind screens, and we're spending more time indoors. And then of course, the nicotine and marijuana in particularly can now be vaped, which is something that was not something that we dealt with in generations past. And we're learning more every single day about how concerned we should be about that. And then, you know, really technology has changed everything. So I bring this up because I hear from parents a lot that They want to, compare their own teenage experiences with the experiences of their child today. And they might think to themselves, you know what, I smoked pot in the 80s, and I smoked a lot of it with my friends, and it was a phase, and I went on through life and I stopped doing it and nothing terrible happened. So, if my kid is doing that, I feel like a hypocrite if I say anything. Or I think at least they're just using pot, right? Which it's not pot anymore, it's weed. But I want us to get past that, because just like the technology and a lot of the things we saw before have changed, so have the drugs in the world your child is living in. So it is a different ballgame. This drug of cannabis today barely resembles anything that you possibly, if you indulged, were smoking in the 70s, 80s, or 90s. It's a completely different ballgame. So we really can't compare our child's experience with our own that we would have had. It's just a different world. So I wanted to start just by doing a little bit of some stats, and these are going to be national. Carolyn actually was able to pull some of your county's data, which I think is fantastic. So we'll go through that at the end. But I'm just curious to know from you all, what percentage of 12th graders do you think have ever used marijuana? And you can throw that in the chat and I'll take a look at those answers. This is coming from Monitoring the Future. Monitoring the Future is a survey that has been done across the country with 8th, 10th, and 12th graders every year since 1975. Okay, so it is really considered the gold standard for gathering information about substance use trends with young people. It helps us in the world of prevention to set our goals for the coming year. And to compare rates. And one thing I can let you know is that whenever you were in high school, the marijuana rates were higher than they are now. So that is some of the good news. And that's actually true of pretty much all substances. Smoking rates are way down, binge drinking is way down. But when it comes to this particular answer, and I'm seeing a little bit of everything from you guys, I don't see any 27% yet, but I'm seeing a lot of people thinking 56%. The answer to this is actually the 43.7. Okay, so that's the percentage of 8th graders who, according to spring of 2020, so this information was gathered right before the pandemic. So we don't know exactly how that's affected things yet. But this is what came back, that by spring of senior year, 44% have ever tried cannabis. Now, I showed this to my son. I've showed this to other kids. If you were to show that to your kids now, they would say, well, not my school. That's those kids are lying. And what I can say is that they have a lot of checks and balances on surveys like this to try to get the most accurate information possible. But that when it comes to norms and what people are perceiving, the general public, kids, adults have a tendency to have to overestimate the percentage of people that they think are doing these kinds of things. Okay, so if you're surprised to hear this, hopefully you'll walk away with some information that the majority of young people are not using marijuana, and definitely not using it on a regular basis. And what do you think about 8th graders? So this is just a true/false question. Do you think that marijuana use was higher in 2000 than it is in 2020? What do you think? You could throw true or false into the chat. Seeing true, 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 false, 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 true. Mostly trues, a couple of falses. All right. This answer is true. Okay, so like I said, a lot of this is trending down. There was a big spike in substance use in the late 90s, early 2000s, and then it started dying down a little bit, and it's plateaued in a lot of areas since about 2010. And marijuana is one of those areas where it's plateaued a little bit. So you can see that lifetime use of marijuana from 2000 to 2020 with this survey, you can see where this was. So I really would not be doing the work that I do and preaching prevention if I didn't think that it worked. If I didn't think that when our parents and our faculty at schools and when our kids and when community members and law enforcement and rec centers and churches, like I honestly believe that when we all get together and we have similar goals and we communicate and we help to boost kids up, then we know that these rates can go down. Drug prevention is about a whole lot more than just educating about the dangers of drugs. It's about boosting all of those skills that kids need to not use substances. It's about helping them to have healthy self-esteem, to manage stress and anxiety, and to have emotional intelligence, to have goals for their future, to have an ability to set boundaries within their relationships and stand up to friends when they're encouraging them to do things that are uncomfortable. And it's a much more positive approach than the scare tactics that used to be used years ago. So I think that we have a good formula. It's not easy. And no matter what we do, there's always going to be some level of substance use, but that doesn't mean we give up. One of the things that is concerning is anybody who is using marijuana by 8th grade is somebody that we worry about because we know that using at an early age increases risk for substance use disorder. And we'll get into that a little bit more later. But throughout our presentation, we're going to be talking about the incredible rise in THC levels that have happened in the cannabis plant in the last, couple of decades. And of course, more recently, as things have become competitive with legalization and decriminalization. So what is THC? THC, Delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol, that's why we call it THC, right? It is one of 500 different chemicals that is in the cannabis plant, but it is the main psychoactive component. It is the chemical that causes the high. You guys are going to be having another presentation next month from SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana. And they do a really great history lesson. I'm not sure if they'll talk to you about that, about how things have changed over time. But one of the things to be aware of is that before humans started messing around with the plant when it was just growing naturally, the other main chemical that we talk about a lot with cannabis is CBD, right? So THC and CBD in nature, before we started messing around with it, they were pretty much in balance. So there was a person would smoke the plant and they would feel relaxed and they would feel okay, but people weren't getting addicted to THC. They weren't having psychotic episodes as a result of it. But what we've done to this plant is figured out how to grow super plants. So taking the seeds and hybriding them, growing them in certain soil and certain conditions with certain lighting. And now we have THC levels that are really high. So what is THC? So it is, like I said before, it is the chemical that produces the high. You have throughout your brain lots of different areas that have cannabis receptors, essentially. And when you smoke marijuana, you eat it, you vape it, whatever, the THC is going to make its way up to the brain and it's going to affect different areas. So one of the different areas that it can affect is sensation. Right? So and also your senses might get altered. So maybe colors look brighter than they would before. It's going to alter your sense of time. So time seems to move a lot more slowly. Changes in mood. And that's generally why a person seeks this out, right? They're looking to change their mood. It's a mood altering drug. Impaired body movement and motor control. Difficulty with thinking and problem solving, increased hunger, elevated heart rate, impaired memory. And we know with really high doses, you have the potential for those really scary things like the hallucinations, delusions, psychosis that we're seeing more and more of as these THC levels get higher. And something else that makes THC different than a lot of other drugs is that it's not water soluble like a lot of other drugs. It's fat soluble, which means that it lingers in the brain and body a lot longer than other drugs. If a person, drinks alcohol, that's out of their system pretty quickly. But if a person uses something, a cannabis product, that THC stays in the fat cells of their body and it metabolizes slowly. So a person could use it once and it could still be detected in their system several days later. If a person uses regularly and even on a daily basis, it really builds up into their system to the point where they could quit and still fail a drug test months later because it's so slowly leaving the system. That's also the reason why you don't hear of withdrawal symptoms from marijuana in the intensity that you do with water-soluble drugs. So it has almost a slow, natural weaning off process, as opposed to something that, like somebody with alcoholism or a heroin addiction. So those are just some of the things to keep in mind about this drug, that it lingers. And while it's still in the system, it could be having some residual effects on the brain and body. I wanted to show you guys a couple of different methods for consumption. And this is part of, for people that get into marijuana and the culture behind it, playing around with all of these different methods, researching it, trying all these different ways is all part of the interest and the fun that goes along with it. So when we see here that we talk about smoking the dry herb, the bud, the flowers of the cannabis plant, and we talk about this average THC potency of about 17%. Just a little bit of a history lesson that back in the 70s, the average THC concentration of what people were smoking was about 1.5%. In the 90s, it was about 4%. We've jumped way up to 17% being the average. It is very easy to get strains of cannabis well over 20, even into over 30%. So we're talking about a serious drug here. This is not the stuff that people were smoking before. No one went to rehab for weed back in the 80s and 90s. And now it's the #1 drug of choice for teens that are entering treatment across the country. So when it comes to smoking it, you've got all of these different methods. You can roll a joint, you can smoke out of a bowl, a blunt, a bong, a bubbler, a homemade creation. You can even smoke out of an apple. You can make pretty much anything into a bong. This glassware, like the bowl, the bong, the bubbler, that is totally legal to buy because technically you can use tobacco out of that. So somebody 21 and over, which is the national law for tobacco now, could go into a smoke shop and buy a bong. You can also order these things online and they can get delivered to your home. Or I know some teens will have they'll order things online and have it delivered to a UPS drop location. There's one at my local grocery store, right? So a kid could order it, they could go to the Acme and go and pick it up. So it's really easy, unfortunately, to get around your parents with a lot of this stuff. Somebody could also smoke the dry herbs out of one of these vaping devices. It's not as popular, but it is a method. So you would just take the dry herb, put it into one of these devices that acts almost like an e-cigarette. Both of these are going to have the odor that typically goes along with cannabis. Other methods, vaporizing. So this is not a new trend, but it's something that is not as well known and something that parents need to know about. So vaping concentrates of cannabis is something that is certainly popular. So these are just some of the different ways that this can look, and trying these different ones, like I said before, is part of the interest and the fun. So there's a process that you can do with the cannabis plant using heat and solvents like sometimes butane or CO2 or ethanol or propane to extract these high doses of THC. So what's left behind are, what can sometimes look like wax, earwax, shatter. And what a person would do is to take that sticky substance and either put it into one of these vape pens, or what is more typical is one of these dab rigs. And then they would use a torch, a butane torch, in order to heat it up and breathe the fumes out of. So we're talking about 60 to 90% THC when we're talking about this. A little bit has a very powerful punch. You can watch some pretty terrifying videos on YouTube of people using these for the first time. And it honestly, for some of them, it looks like they've just used PCP or something. So we're talking about some serious stuff here. And then, of course, one of the most convenient, easy methods are these pre-filled cartridges of oils that work as an electronic cigarette, essentially. So you've got the battery, you've got the cartridge that comes filled, you've got the charger, and that is something as a parent to be looking out for. These weird chargers that you know you didn't buy, these pen-like devices. And this is different than the nicotine e-juice because obviously it has a whole different substance in it. But these are ones that you can often just toss when you're done and then put a new cart in. This is what is responsible for the e-volley. So before the pandemic, all over the news was about these lung injury cases. It feels like years ago, but it was only a year ago that we were hearing about this. And we were trying to figure out, and the health departments and the FDA was trying to figure out what is causing this. They knew it was related to vaping of something, but they really came out with, this is related to black market carts that people are vaping, that the manufacturers that are making these carts were cutting their supply with a thickener agent called vitamin E acetate. And that was responsible for a large portion of the lung injuries we were seeing. And they linked it to some of these products. So 56% of the people with e-volley said that they had been vaping a product they purchased called Dank. Dank's not even a product, it's a packaging. So if you are a black market illicit manufacturer of vape pens or dab pens, sorry, you could just buy the packaging and fill it with your product, right? TKO is another one, Smart Cart, Rove. So we're not hearing about these anymore since the word has gotten out and it's scared some people and they're being a little bit more cautious and careful. But it's just to let you know that it's a little bit of a free-for-all out there now. And the black market stuff in states where it's not legalized and you're under the age, even in a legal state, are attractive because that's the easiest to get your hands on. And then, of course, the last method I wanted to talk about are edibles. So the edible market with legalization has exploded. You can get coffee K-cups, cereals, sodas, brownies, cookies, candies, anything that you can imagine with THC in it. And it's pretty unpredictable. So there'll be a label on that lets you know like the THC level of what you're buying. But if anybody on here is familiar with baking cookies, right? You put all the ingredients into the bowl and you stir it up and then you put it out on the cookie tray and each one's a little bit different, right? You might have one that has 15 chocolate chips in it and one that only has 3. So it's pretty unpredictable to be able to say that this cookie has this amount of THC in it when there could be more in some and less in others, which makes it pretty unpredictable. And this is typically the method where I hear of the most adverse consequences, the most adverse health risks of people feeling like they had panic symptoms and things like that. And that is also because of the delayed reaction for it to kick in. So if you're somebody who is smoking or vaping THC, it hits your lungs, your brain very quickly, right? You feel the way you want to feel, you taper, you stop. When you eat it, you don't feel the effects for upwards of 2 hours. So you don't know if you've overdone it, which some people do because they are like, oh, this isn't working. I don't feel anything. And then they have more, right? So what about CBD? So I just want to put out there that CBD is a legal product. It's one of the other cannabinoids that are in the cannabis plant. It's the one that is associated with having health benefits. It is being researched, but for right now, it's being advertised in many ways as the cure-all and the treatment for literally everything. I mean, you can get CBD infused products for your dogs now. And there is some evidence that this could absolutely be helpful in some areas. The only FDA approved substance right now is one that's for some rare forms of epilepsy. And the rest, though, it's largely unregulated. Purity levels are in question. You could be buying stuff where the CBD levels are so low that there's no way that you're going to have any health benefits from it. And there's also things that you really have to research and keep in mind, especially if you're going to be giving this to your kids. It could interact with medications that they're on. If you're getting it from someplace that's not reputable, again, there could be some purity issues with that. So please talk to your doctor if you're considering this for yourself or for your child. So let's talk about this, right? Because I think that this is huge. We're going to start getting into more of the prevention side of things now. So talked a little bit about some current trends. So let's talk about what it means to be a teenager and what's going on in the brain and the life of a teen. So I think if you've taken any presentations from this organization before, you probably know that adolescence is a really special time. It's a time of tremendous opportunity and tremendous vulnerability, all because of brain plasticity. So the adolescent brain is extremely malleable, which means that it can be changed. And that is a wonderful thing because we throw so much at our teenagers, right? We expect them to learn so much information in school, to develop coping skills, to develop identity, to figure out how to socialize. And the teen brain is wired to learn new information very quickly. Way more than we could, right? The whole saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. That's where this comes from. But when you're young, you can absorb information very, very quickly. My niece is 11 and she is learning the ukulele right now. So every week when I go over, she has a new song for me. I guarantee if she were to wait till she was 40 to pick up that instrument, she'd have a tougher time with it. But now she is rocking and rolling with it. So that's the wonderful thing. Your brain develops from back to front. The front is your decision-making, logic, judgment, executive functioning, ability to delay gratification, to think long-term. And we know that that's not done forming until a person's in their 20s, right? The vulnerability part of teen plasticity comes in particular when we're talking about addiction. So just like a kid can learn an instrument or a language more quickly, they can learn unhealthy things more quickly too. They can learn unhealthy coping skills, and they can pick up addiction. Addiction is a learning process that happens in the brain, in the reward center of the brain, and it's much more likely to happen in a brain that is still forming. It's still malleable. So that is why we talk about delaying the onset of substance use for as long as possible. Give that brain a chance to kind of cook, to get to where it needs to get to. I'm seeing a lot of chats come in, and I just want to see what some of this is. Oh, okay, it's just nothing that I need to address. So some other things that are going on with your teenager is that during this time of adolescence, they are wired to take risks, which is a wonderful, necessary thing because they are trying to develop skills for independence so that one day they will leave the nest and be able to take care of themselves. But it's also absolutely terrifying as a parent because they want to take all of these risks and behave in all these adult ways without an adult capacity to stop and to think through what the consequences could be, which is why they still have us, right? It's why we don't send them off when they're 15, when they think they've got it all under control, and we know they don't. So risk taking normal, healthy, it's a way for them to discover boundaries. And that is why, even though they're pushing back against you, they need you now more than ever to think through all of the different things that could happen and to have consequences when they step over the line. We also know that teen decisions are often more emotional than logical. So while your decision-making center is not grown and formed yet, your emotional center, your limbic system is very active. It is on overdrive. So decisions are often made more emotionally than logically, as we know. And we know that for teen, reward often trumps risk. So as an adult, I can look at a situation and say, that would be really fun. That would be a really cool experience. However, I have to wake up at this time the next morning. I have this responsibility. It's just not worth it. But when you're a teen and you've got all of this other stuff going on and you feel reward a whole lot more powerfully than you do in your adult years. So that can be very motivating. You might make decisions based on what the reward might be rather than the fear of the risk. So for example, your parents aren't going to be home. You know that if you get caught, you're going to get in huge amounts of trouble, but you also know that it could boost your popularity, get you in with a certain group. That might be really meaningful at that time. And then, of course, we know that teens are group oriented. They are moving into this part of life where it was all about family before, and now they're starting to make their tribes outside of their home. And one of the things that I often see with my young people I'm working with that are using marijuana pretty frequently is that there is a big social side of that, especially in the beginning. It can be a real group bonding experience, getting high together. It can really help some kids to define an identity, to define a culture that they feel like they're a part of. Identifying as a stoner can be a identity that somebody gravitates towards. Some kids will feel a tremendous sense of self-esteem from being that person that knows the most about weed, that person people come to when they have questions. Or somebody might even start dealing at this time in life, not just for the money, but for the sense of importance that helps them feel. So all of this factors in to why it is so challenging for us to address this topic. All right, so we know that drugs in general can be tools with a lot of different functions. So we have to keep in mind that it's a whole lot more than just curiosity sometimes that can lead a kid to abuse marijuana. Often when a person uses something for the first time, it is because of either peer pressure or curiosity. Right? So somebody that is smoking weed 3 times a week is no longer trying to satisfy curiosity. They know what they're doing. They're now seeking it out. But in the beginning, that can be it. But then somebody that continues with it, it's often for one of these reasons: relaxation and pleasure. And we can't deny that that's a factor in this. It's the reason why adults have a drink on occasion. It's the reason why some adults do smoke cannabis on occasion. We know that there's a social aspect of this. And the ones that worry us the most, in particular with teens, because if we think about wanting them to have a toolbox of skills for life, we want that toolbox to be filled with lots of different ways to handle emotional pain. We are in an epidemic of stress and anxiety in this country now. And we're seeing it more and more with our young people, that they just don't feel equipped to deal with life. They feel inadequate. They're comparing themselves to others. They're afraid for their future. The amount of anxiety and tenseness and stress that young people are feeling now, drugs work really quickly to get rid of those feelings, unfortunately. But we know as adults that over time, it's going to add to that emotional pain. And we want them to be able to sit with those uncomfortable feelings and tolerate them and work through them in healthy ways. But what we start to see with some people that get into substances is that they take the toolbox that maybe had talk to my parents when I'm stressed, exercise, do this, do that, all these healthy things, and they start throwing it out because the drug is the quickest way to make those things happen. And then they get to a place like Karen and we take the drugs away and they have an empty toolbox and we have to help them refill it. So all of these different reasons can be why somebody gravitates towards cannabis. So what are some of the things that concern us though? One is addiction. So the old adage that you can't get addicted to weed, it's just not true. It's just not true. Like I said, it's the number one reason that it's the number one drug of choice for teens that are in treatment across this country. It may not be the only drug they're using, but it's the one that they say is their favorite. They're like, I'll stop doing the pills, I'll stop doing that, but they still want to be able to smoke weed every day. Addiction is 2 parts. It's a physical component, which is definitely there with cannabis, especially with the high THC levels now. We do see physical withdrawal symptoms. We see nausea, vomiting, headaches, insomnia, but a lot of it is more psychological and emotional. So it's this, I need it to wake up, I need it to fall asleep, I need it to deal with any uncomfortable feeling. And that's the part that's a lot harder to treat. And that love affair can happen for some people very quickly with cannabis. 1 in 6 teens who regularly use will develop a cannabis use disorder. It could be mild, moderate, or severe, but they're on that continuum somewhere where it's negatively impacting their life, yet they're continuing to use. Learning. So all of us want our kids to be as successful in school as possible. We all want our kids to have a bright future and to do as well as they can so that they have as many opportunities as possible. We know that you have a lot of cannabis receptors in the hippocampus of the brain. That is your memory center. So it can impact the ability to form new memories and to retain information that is being learned. It can interfere with problem solving, and we know that it can create amotivational syndrome, which is essentially a laziness, a lack of drive, a lack of motivation, the ability to have your expectations for yourself that used to be up here, drop it down to here and be totally okay with that. Driving. Even though many will say they're better drivers when they're high, they are not. They are slower and more paranoid drivers when they're high because they're afraid of getting pulled over. That does not make you a better driver. And when we think about our teenage novice drivers who are already trying to learn the skills to be safe on the road, when we add things in that impair your judgment, that decrease your alertness, your concentration, and your reaction time, it's not making you a better driver. And then mental health. And this is the one that I really worry about. This high potency, we are seeing like quite a few of our patients that come into treatment at K.N.O.W. are coming straight from psychiatric units. They had a psychotic break as a result of heavy cannabis use. They were stabilized and then they were moved into treatment. And even outside of that, it is very effective, unfortunately, and we see it being used for kids with ADD, anxiety, depression, pretty much anything. And there's a real chicken and the egg phenomenon here. What was there first? Are they smoking because of the mental health and then it just made things worse? Or did the smoking cause the mental health? I've seen it both ways, and there's no real answer to that. And then lung health. And this is the one that often gets forgotten about when it comes to cannabis, because we don't hear a lot about lung cancer with cannabis use. But one of the things I can say is that it is an irritant to the lungs. It can lead to really heavy coughing. A lot of the nasty chemicals that are in tobacco are also in cannabis. Smoke of any kind is not supposed to be in our lungs. Anything that we would be vaping is not supposed to be in our lungs. Oxygen, right? Why is this so difficult to tackle? We already talked a little bit about some of these things, but the perception of harm with cannabis right now is pretty low in the surveys that are being done. When perception of harm is low, use tends to go up. And it's not surprising that perception of harm is low when it's such a national conversation now, legalization and medical marijuana. So there's this widespread belief that it's harmless. There's this huge culture attached to it that has its own lingo and clothing and music. And it's something that people can gravitate towards. The belief that everybody gets high, everybody. So it's so normalized. Users are well-researched and staunchly defensive. I never get into an argument with somebody that loves their cannabis. Not going to happen. We can do some motivational interviewing, some weighing of pros and cons, helping them to come to their own conclusions, but going back at them with facts, they will have another fact just to throw in your face. I don't know everything about terpenes that they know, or the difference between crumble and rosin and all of this stuff. Don't even try to go there. The defensiveness is huge, and it can become a powerful coping mechanism. And there's not one profile. And I think you used to be able to identify who the stoner was in school. And now kids will tell you, our captain of our, whatever team, our class president. So we hear it in a lot of different ways. Perception of harm. I'm not going to get a whole lot into the legalization, but obviously it's playing a role in a lot of these things. We've got it legalized in a lot of states. It's only going to become more states. 68% of Americans support making marijuana legal, and 90% support allowing for medical marijuana. So that is absolutely affecting things. Just for time purposes, I'm gonna move on a little bit. Let's focus on what we can control as parents. So some of this information was scary, a little bit of a reality check. If we believe statistics, the more kids are not using than are, which is fantastic. And there's a lot that you can do. So let's talk about risk and protective factors for use. So what would make somebody more likely to get involved with marijuana use, even though there's not one profile? So some of these are personality traits. Some of these exist within a child's environment. Some exist within your relationship with them. So the first one is being a sensation seeker. So a sensation seeker is a personality of someone that likes to take risks for thrills. So this was maybe your child that loved to climb trees and had a lot of broken bones growing up. And they always have a tendency to act first and think about it later. Sometimes your kids with ADHD who are a little bit more impulsive are often considered sensation seekers. So that can be a little bit of a risk factor. And you just really need to channel that personality trait into healthy risk taking. Perception of parental approval. When a young person believes that their parents either actively or passively are okay with them using, they're more likely to use. It's just, my parents don't care, more likely to use. My parents smoke with me, obviously. For those who say my parents would kill me, that's their language. My parents would kill me if I ever used, or I know they don't want me to. They're less likely to use. That's not always the case, but we're talking about odds here, less likely. So believing that their parents are okay with it is increases those risks. Hanging with friends that use. They might be able to say no thank you the first couple times, but the more they're around it, more likely they are to dive in. Strained family dynamics, unhealthy role models in their life, the musicians they look up to, the people they follow on social media, they're all about weed, right? That could be increasing things. Don't like school, don't do well in school, poor connection to it, low perception of harm, easy access. The opposite would be protective. If you have a child that's a little bit more cautious, they think before they act. If you have conversations regularly where your child knows your beliefs on this, that I believe it's dangerous for you, I love you too much to allow you to take the risk. I'm not saying never. If you move to a state where it's legal and you're 21, you're an adult then, I might still have opinions on it that we'll talk about, but that'll be your life. But while you're here with me and while I have the influence that I do, I don't want this for you. And I'm going to do what I have to do to keep you safe from that. Friends don't use, strong family bonds, healthy role models. You're showing them the right way. Strong connection to school. They understand the harm and you're doing what you can to reduce access to use. Risk factors for addiction. Who do you need to be even more concerned about? Some of these risk factors are things like, and this is for every drug, not just cannabis, starting use at a young age. Kids who start putting mind-altering substances into their brain before age 15 quadruple their chances of developing a substance use disorder. Every year we can delay that onset, those chances go down. Genetic predisposition. We know that substance use disorders, that's a brain disease, and it runs in families. So just like, the genes for breast cancer might run in families, the genes for addiction can run in families too. So if you are in recovery, if you have siblings or a parent that is in active use or in recovery, or like myself, I have a brother that passed away from an addiction in his teenage years. So I know that runs in our genetics, and I've been very, very transparent about that, as you should, because it's nothing to be ashamed of. Environmental factors. So a lot of that is things that we talked about before. And then things like a history of abuse or trauma, those increase the likelihood, and then mental health disorders. So those are some of the things that we worry about. So we'll just real quickly go through some signs, because I want to get into the conversations, because I think that that is really the most important thing we can do here. So there's a lot of signs and symptoms that could indicate your child is using substances. But the thing to mostly be aware of is, as a parent, if you are noticing changes in your child, changes in your relationship, with their communication with you, their academics, their interests, if they're dropping out of activities that used to be important to them, they're not hanging with the same friends, they're constantly asking for money, their relationship with you, they're becoming more secretive, more combative, you're noticing personality changes. All of these are signs of something to be concerned about. It might not be substances, it might be something else, but it warrants a conversation with your child for sure. Don't second guess yourself. If you see things, if you're concerned, bring it up to your child. Do you have the right to search their room? Absolutely. For no reason, I wouldn't. But if you have suspicions, if you're seeing things, if you've asked them and they've denied, but you're continuing to see things, if the school has contacted you that they're seeing things they're concerned about, your child is going to try to paint a picture probably that things are okay. Listen to your gut. And this presentation will be available, so you guys can take a greater look at some of these indicators. But if you're in your child's room and they've got butane, torches, lots of Q-tips, these containers, isopropyl alcohol, weird logos, if they're talking about 420 or 710, those are all like kind of things that go along with getting high. Those would be things to be concerned about. What to do if you suspect use. I think that it's hard not to overreact, right? Be calm. Have a plan. Resist the urge, if you find a dab pen in your child's bedroom, to just go on the warpath and start screaming and yelling and grounding you forever. And you want to make sure that you're calm and rational in your approach. If you have a spouse or partner, you want to make sure that you guys talk first and are on the same page and have a united front. Before you address this with your child, do not talk to them while they are under the influence. You want to wait till everybody is clear-headed. You want to approach your child with what you've noticed or what you're aware of. You want to ask them if they're using and why. Why did you do that? Like, tell me the circumstances. You can have consequences for behaviors that you want to discourage, right? So you have, you set the expectations early and then you follow through on consequences. That consequence, if it was a one-time thing, could be, okay, well, you can't hang out with that friend for several weeks or whatever. You have to figure that out as a family. It could be that they need to research and with appropriate websites and give you some information about what they learned. If you put consequences into place and they continue to use and they continue to have consequences, if they're getting combative and mean and nasty and you're seeing their personality really change, which can very much happen. I work with this interventionist and he says, I would rather do an intervention on someone addicted to heroin than a teenager that's addicted to weed. Nobody is going to argue that the heroin is okay, right? But they will argue left, right, up and down that despite everything blowing up around them, it has nothing to do with the weed. Get a professional involved, right? Seek out a behavioral health assessment. Ask somebody who does this for a living to help you navigate this. It's really important. Talk early and often. There's a fantastic resource that you guys have been left with, and it's from the Partnership to End Addiction, and it's the Marijuana Talk Kit. And it gives really great suggestions for how to start conversations with your kids. But I really think it's important to start these conversations early and to have them often. This is not a once and done, okay? Tonight we're going to have a formal sit down and we're going to talk about drugs. This needs to come up naturally, you know? You're watching a movie from the 80s and you're aware that the actor that starred in it actually passed away from drugs. That's a conversation. You're listening to lyrics while you're driving in the car that are promoting substance use as being a totally fine thing. That's a conversation, right? So our tips are, be clear about your views. If you leave it wishy-washy, like, I don't want you to, but I know you're going to, just don't be dumb about it, that's very unclear. Like, what does that mean? I'm allowed to smoke every once in a while as long as I keep my grades up. So we want to be pretty clear and try not to lecture, right? All they hear is this, and they have tuned you out. We want to keep it positive. Scare tactics, you know, threats, all of those things don't go a very long way. Having open-ended conversations where you are probing them for, so what are your thoughts? What are you seeing? What are you learning in school? Have you known anybody who's started doing this? What are your thoughts around it? Be calm, be relaxed, make sure you understand their point of view. And the more you bring them into the conversation rather than talking at them, the more likely they are to hear you out. Here's some great conversation starters. I love preparing teens ahead of time for what they might experience. So your kid's going to a birthday party, the kids, you know, it's a 16-year-old birthday party. You're allowing them to go after doing some investigation. What are you going to do if there's drinking or marijuana use at the party? Like, how are you going to handle that tonight? Help them work through a plan. How would you handle it if somebody wanted you to use? Tell me about his or her parents. So they're hanging out with some new kid. Tell me about their parents. If they're the coolest parents ever and their house is always the hangout, and you know, you might want to, you know, that could be totally innocent, or you might want to probe a little bit further, right? And then rolling with pushback. So some of the things that you might start to hear over time is, I know, we've talked about this before. And you could say, I know I'm probably getting annoying to you now. It's scary for me as a parent. Things are getting legalized. We're hearing more about this. I just took this training and learned a little bit more. So I just want to keep this dialogue going, because I know that for every conversation I have with you, there's probably 10 happening amongst peers your age about this. So I need to continue to reiterate that. They say, I'm only doing it once in a while on the weekends, it's no big deal. You could say something like, well, I'm glad it's not more than that. I would be really curious to hear from you what would make it seem like a big deal. So that kind of lets them figure out some boundaries, and then you can talk about those things more. Would you rather I drink alcohol? Weed is so much safer. Well, I really don't want you doing anything that could be harmful to you. I'm curious why you think weed is so much safer. So marijuana is a plant, it's natural. How harmful could it be? Lots of natural plants can be dangerous. Tobacco is a plant. Heroin comes from a plant. Cocaine comes from a plant. So the idea that it's natural really doesn't have anything to do with my concerns over how this impacts your brain and your body. The whole legal part. So this is a toughie. You could absolutely dive into the fact that even in states where it's legalized, it's for 21 and over. Nowhere in this country does anybody think it's a good idea for teens to be using marijuana for recreational purposes. Brain and body are still developing. That is why. And why do you think some states are starting to legalize this? So maybe see where they might be coming from with that. I don't know what to say when other kids ask me to use. Well, let's talk about that. Like, what's some of the experience that you've had before? What are some of the feelings that you've had? What are some of the responses you've had in the past? And then help them think through some others. And it might just be as simple as, I'm not into that. That's not my thing. Or I tried it once and it made me really anxious and I didn't like it and it's not my thing. Or, you know, I've got to get up early tomorrow. Those kinds of things. I'm sure you smoked weed when you were younger. If you didn't, be honest with that. It wasn't something that I was interested in. I was an athlete. I was really into school. It's just, it wasn't something that my friends and I did. I never felt the need. And if you did, I'm an advocate for trust in relationships, so we're not going to lie to kids. But you don't have to give a ton of details about what that was for you. You can say things like, I'm not going to pretend that I didn't. I'm very lucky that nothing horrible happened to me. And then if you have like a story of a friend or something, that something negative did happen to, you can bring that in there. You can also focus on the fact that the drugs today are very different than anything you experienced when you were younger. And that's why the concern is there. And then everyone smokes weed, which is not true, but it can certainly feel that way. Nobody brags about being a non-user, right? Nobody puts that out there to the world that like they don't use, but they will brag if they do. We're going to move into me shutting up a little bit because I've talked a lot, to getting to hear a little bit about some of your questions that you had as we were going through this presentation today. And these are some fantastic resources for a little bit more information.
All right.
Sharing my screen. Oh, my
Why don't
contact.
you keep it there? That's a great place to have it.
Okay.
Okay.
Should
All
I
right.
leave this or stop sharing?
No, stay right there.
Okay.
That way, if anybody is looking to get a hold of you, they can.
Right.
They can grab that, take a screenshot of that. That'd be a great way to hold that there. So, all right, let's go ahead and start with some of the questions. We're going to start with the ones that were sent in earlier. Carolyn, are you going to be able to come in and jump into this?
I can't start my video for some reason.
okay.
That the host has stopped it.
That's me.
Oh.
I'll help you.
Okay.
Sorry about that, Carolyn. We want to see you. There we go.
Okay. All right. Well, let's just go ahead and get started. There were a few that were answered during it. I'll throw a little variance out on some of these, but that way. And I do know that for your next webinar, you are going to have Sam discussing the legal side of this. So anything that was brought up as a legal issue, we're going to go ahead and leave that for the next webinar, correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. That sounds wonderful. Okay. Let's just go over real quick. How accessible is marijuana to our youth?
And Carolyn, you can jump in as somebody who works in schools within Westchester County, but I can tell you from my perspective, it's really, really quite easy. There's something called weed maps. You can go on and look all of the different places that you can get that. But I guarantee there are probably several people within your own neighborhood that you would be shocked to learn are selling marijuana. Very easy to access.
And I think while it varies from community to community, monitoring the future, the survey you talked about earlier, always ask kids, how easy would it be to get it if you wanted it? And the numbers are really striking. And just to point towards the legalization issue, when we talk about how easy it is for kids to obtain substances, the easiest drugs for them to obtain are the legal ones. So alcohol and tobacco, and that's closely followed by marijuana. So we know that as it becomes increasingly legalized throughout the country, we're seeing kids really believe they would have very easy access to it.
All right, thank you. How do you address the topic with kids who aren't interested in it yet, but with time, as they get older, they may come to a time they're interested? But at the same time, you don't want to start their curiosity, but you want to have the conversation. So I guess maybe the question is, at which age or grade level should you start talking about this?
Well, I can tell you from, I don't know specifically about Westchester County, but I know typically in health education, they start talking about marijuana in 5th grade in most curriculums. So some kids, especially if they have older brothers and sisters, know a lot more. And then when I'm in classes with 5th graders, there are some who have no idea what I'm talking about. And they generally, it doesn't pique their curiosity. They just have very little interest in it. I really believe in starting these conversations early and often without feeling like you have to get super, super specific. I do presentations as young as kindergarten, and that's even just focused on poison prevention and respect for your body and questioning the things that you put into it. As edibles have become more popular, we have had poisonings with young kids. So just talking to them about rules, like there are things in our world that might look safe that might not be. And you never pick something up or put it into your body if you're not sure what it is. And you can start young with talking about things like peer pressure. And it doesn't have to be anything drug related. You could talk about, like, do your friends ever want you to be mean to another kid at school? Do you ever feel that kind of pressure? Like, you can set them up for the skills that they need to have in order to be able to handle those situations as they get older.
And I
Carolyn,
think-
I'd love to hear from your perspective. I'm not sure that we introduced your role within the county. Carolyn's a licensed clinical social worker and also a credentialed alcohol and substance abuse counselor and a credentialed prevention professional. She's currently the student assistance counselor at Horace Greeley High School in Chappaqua and has worked with adolescents and families in Westchester County for over 20 years. So I'm sure this is a question that you get quite frequently, and I'd be very curious to hear your take on this.
Thank you. I would really agree with Christine and really reach back to where she talked about early and often. I think there are always opportunities, and to think about it a little bit like talking to kids about sex. You're not going to start with something that's beyond their capability to understand or to really process. You're going to meet them where they are developmentally, and you're going to talk to them about exactly as Christine said. You look for those opportunities where something comes up. You're watching a movie, you have cousins over and something happens, and they're wondering what's going on. What is it that those older cousins are up to? There are ways to talk to kids that is developmentally appropriate without piquing any curiosity, but really helping them understand, and really helping them understand your perspective of concern for their health and safety throughout.
Thank you. And there's a lot of really great websites, and a lot of the ones that Christine has listed have great information and conversations, as we just talked about too, with the conversation starters and different ways to have these conversations. Somebody wrote here, and I'm going to put this to both of you. It seems a little unrealistic to talk about prevention when marijuana is so prevalent in high school in America. Teenagers then get peer pressured into trying. How do we navigate the landscape of self-control instead?
I'll let you go, Carolyn, to at least talk about the perception of, if, that we need. It's really called harm reduction. What's being described, and that's something that a lot of parents and other professionals subscribe to. They think it's just a lot more realistic approach. But it's not one that we subscribe to at Karen. We like to talk to kids about just being open and honest, that these are some of the risks if you do decide to use, some of the benefits if you don't, and then helping them navigate all of that. But Carolyn, in terms of the perception that it's a lost cause, what do you have to say?
Yeah, when we were talking about this earlier, I brought up the local statistics. So in Westchester County, and these statistics come from the Westchester County Coalition for Drug and Alcohol Free Youth. And really, when we look at it, we always try to lead with the positive. In Westchester County, when we ask kids, have you used in the last 30 days, which we think is a capture of regular use. 8th graders, 98% of the 8th graders report having not used in the last 30 days, which leaves only 2% who have ever tried it. And just as you said, when we're talking about 8th graders, if they're already involved, that early use is so detrimental to brain development. Of the 10th graders, 84% reported no use in the last 30 days. And of 12th graders, 76% reported no use in the past month. So while we do have slightly higher numbers when we're talking about ever tried, we know that the overwhelming majority of our kids aren't using. When kids are involved, they tend to surround themselves with other students who are using. So it's so easy for not only them to believe that everyone's using, but also for their parents who see who they're hanging out with, know some of their friends, to really get this perception that, wow, it's everybody. It's even these kids I didn't expect. But that's often greatly inflated.
Yeah. And I totally get that perspective as a parent, that I want to be realistic here. Like, I know that my kid's being exposed. I know that he or she is possibly going to be curious and possibly going to use. I think it's hard when we as parents don't set clear expectations for what we have, because where do you draw the line? Do you then say it's okay when you're 16, but not when you're 15, or it's okay to use once a month, then maybe once a week, or every day, as long as it's not affecting academics and sports? Like, how do you help them draw the line there? And when it comes to the idea of self-control, every single person who ever had a substance use disorder thought that they would have enough self-control to stop themselves before it got to a bad place. So for some, with the way that they're wired, they won't be able to have self-control. That part of them that convinces themselves it's okay will take over. So it's just kind of a slippery slope when we start trying to allow for that. So have as much control over the conversation while you have them with you. And err on the side of safety is always what I try to go with.
Yeah. How about should parents drug test their kids with or without having any concern, or just make it an option, or only if they suspect? What do you think?
There's a lot of experts that would say no, that it destroys trust. There's a lot of ways that kids can get around the drug testing. So if that is your only method for measuring whether they're using, then possibly not. But I think it is a tool that can certainly be used at some points. I don't know, Carolyn, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say that you never want that to be your main source of information, and that it really has to be part of a bigger plan. That I think if you have a youngster that maybe you've had a couple of incidents in the past where they've come home under the influence and they are lobbying hard to get that driver's permit, maybe testing would be part of that picture. Like, okay, I need to know you're making healthy decisions. If we could do some random testing where I would feel confident that you're no longer involved, that then we'll work towards getting the permit. I think it has to be part of a bigger picture, and not just testing by itself. I did have a parent years ago who his son had really struggled with addiction and was clean, and they used testing to help keep him on the straight and narrow path. And it was something they had agreed to together. So I think there's definitely a role for it, but it is not the panacea. It's not going to tell you for sure whether or not your kid is using. It's not going to always be the most reliable source. It can become a game between parents and kids with how they can get over a urine screen.
Yeah, having the professional be the bad guy that does that, does the drug testing, is probably advised. If they're to the point where you're so concerned that you're drug testing them on a regular basis, they might need to be in the treatment community to some degree, maybe in outpatient counseling. If they're in intensive outpatient or residential, the drug testing is a part of that, but it's not something that the parent is doing. It's the professional is handling that, and they have tools, test kits that are a lot more sophisticated than the one you can get at CVS.
Yes, that's true. So a couple of questions have come in about, okay, so you have a kid who's come home high, they're admitting that they have used. What do I do? What could be consequences? I don't want them to think it's okay. So how do we handle this?
What do you tell parents, Carolyn?
I think that it really comes down to focusing on the health issues and your reasons for why you don't want them to use. So I've had kids say to me, yeah, I told my mom I really want her to okay it. you know, they're really looking for parental consent. They've gotten involved and they don't really know how to get out of it, and they are looking for parental consent. The more you can stress with them, here are the reasons why I don't want you to use, and to really have your own toolkit with, we know the impact it has on brain development at your age. We know the impact it has on mental health, including anxiety and depression and psychosis. We know the impact that it has on academic issues. All of those things are why I take it this seriously. And here are going to be the consequences moving forward. So I think you start with how much you love them, what your concerns are for them, but then really laying out, this is how strongly I believe it, that you can't use. So if you're coming home and you're under the influence, here are the consequences. This is how we're going to handle it. So.
Okay. Again, don't have these conversations when your child is high.
Absolutely. Waiting.
Emotions are running high, you know.
And absolutely exploring what was going on in that instance. Were you in a situation where you felt like, is this a group of kids that really you're not comfortable with, and you're more likely to give in to whatever everybody else is doing, or just uncomfortable around them, and it's easier to be with them while you're using. So
that's huge. I had a parent at a presentation once say that after that first time that they found out that their kid was using, they had that very honest conversation. And he said, I am so anxious in social situations. It's the one thing that I know helps me to chill and relax. So, you know, they got him some help for some social anxiety issues, because the longer he uses weed as a crutch, he'll always need it in life, right?
Yes. Christine, you had mentioned that marijuana was one of the #1 drugs of choice for kids entering treatment. So are they entering treatment for marijuana abuse, or is it usually because there's other drugs that they're using? What do you see?
Both can be true. We do have teens and young adults who enter treatment at K.N.O.W primarily for cannabis use disorder, but often it is in conjunction with some other things. We actually are seeing a huge trend with our female teen patients with alcohol. You know, the guys too, but we're seeing the alcohol use rates go way up with our teenage girls. And then some of the other ones are pills. And so it's often like, it might be the drug of choice, but not the only one that they're using. And it might not be the one that rose to the level of consequence that got them there, but it might be one of the harder ones for them to stop. And I can just tell you, just from my perspective as someone who does behavioral health assessments on kids and who's raised a teenager, that whole idea of it being a gateway drug, that not, I don't even like the term, not everybody that uses marijuana will go on to do anything else. But for some of the kids that I've worked with that got very into, you know, they used nicotine, they used alcohol, they got into cannabis pretty heavily. Where I see that go next these days is LSD, shrooms, pills, and then potentially cocaine. And then the end game, what we're seeing today is obviously we hear on the news, the heroin and stuff like that. So it can open the door for curiosity for other things. And this LSD and shrooms thing is one I'm hearing a lot now. And it always precedes pretty significant cannabis use. So I don't know if you're seeing that too, Carolyn, but.
Yeah, similar profile. And I would also say that with the high concentration of THC, kids can easily become very addicted. And where we wouldn't see kids heading to treatment for just marijuana use years ago, now that's not so uncommon. Kids who are using really high concentration THC, where they only need a little and just do it all day long. They have a THC cart and a pen, easy to conceal, use a little on their way into school, use it a little bit during the day, using it in the evening to relax and unwind, and just keeping a level of intoxication that lasts really all day, and then getting overwhelmed and not able to function in their normal day-to-day life pretty quickly.
Yeah. There's not much odor with those pens, so they can use them in school, in their bedroom.
Yeah. Here's one, Carolyn. So, God, somebody's asking, how do you separate your teen from friends who they get high with without alienating your team?
You know, I think nobody wants, including all of us, no one wants you to tell us who our friends can be.
Mm,
We have all different types of friends. And I think one of the ways I always coach parents is if they have a group of friends, there might be a group of friends where they've gotten into trouble with legal trouble, gotten into situations where you've said, nope, you can't hang out with them. And particularly with younger kids, that's absolutely true. But I think trying to help them expand their group of friends. And what about some friends that aren't using? And what about adding some new activities into the picture? Because if you're coming home under the influence, you're going to be getting grounded, and this is just going to go on and on and on. You need some other people. So instead of putting down people that they may feel very loyal to, really looking to help them expand their group of friends and find kids that support some of those other things that they enjoy and get involved with, can be very helpful. That doesn't mean there aren't times where you don't say, yeah, you can't be with that group of kids for this reason.
okay. A couple people have been asking, and there's one question here. I know we're talking about, we keep saying our kids, but somebody here is asking for a child that's over 21. Okay, so whether it's legal state or not, I would assume it is, who feels smoking marijuana is just fine and hasn't any harmful effects. In fact, he brags that smoking marijuana makes food taste better. How do you handle that?
Well, I would definitely ask myself how they're functioning. Are they having consequences as a result of their use? Are they in school or employed? Are they, eating right? Are they taking care of themselves? Are their relationships successful? So you kind of look for any areas where it could be having some really negative impact. And obviously, if it is, you need to be even more concerned. It certainly gets a little bit more challenging as your child gets older and you have a little bit less control over what happens with them. But you can certainly continue those conversations. We have a lot of our young adult programming at K.N.O.W. We're seeing this whole failure to thrive, failure to launch population with our young adults who were heavily using cannabis. We're seeing them really delayed and still very dependent on their family to financially take care of them and to do a lot of things. And we certainly don't want that to happen. So I would really, I'm not sure how serious the situation is. If it is, I would encourage you to talk to a professional to see what they might be able to do. If you can convince your child to go for a behavioral health assessment, just to see how concerned everybody needs to be. Carolyn, do you have anything different to say?
No, I think that's accurate, but I also think, remember that while you don't have control, you often have influence. And sometimes the influence is something like, well, we're still paying your car insurance. And if you're using, I'm really concerned about that. So that's a negotiating point. So you're really looking for ways that you can help, really help them look at the bigger picture, how it's impacting their lives.
Yeah, and not enable.
Yes. A couple questions here. We're just going to put these kind of together. It's about, how do you get your school to take more of a stance on drug use? Got a couple of parents saying that drug use is rampant in their counties. How do we get the schools to take a more stand on it? They seem to sweep it under the rug. Carolyn?
Oh, my initial thought is that every school is looking for parents who are interested in getting involved. Every community, I think, has a coalition that is trying to work towards addressing these issues in really creative ways, in partnering with the schools. So to look for whether it's the county coalition or your community's coalition, and to really reach out to the PTA, because I believe that everyone has the kids' best interest at heart. That really, when we work together, instead of sort of, you should be doing it more, you should be doing it more. When the school points to the parents and the parents point to the school, we're not accomplishing much. But when we work together, it's really amazing the things that we can accomplish.
Okay. Thank you. This question is asking, has any of the coalitions been able to come up with a successful campaign focusing on weed? Anybody?
So I guess maybe that falls into my category.
Yeah.
There are a number of coalitions actually on this call as we speak, and there have been several different versions of successful campaigns. There have been some media campaigns that have really kind of caught the attention of young people. I'm thinking of one that specifically kind of was very image grabbing. So there was kind of that print media campaign. There have been some campaigns to educate kids in a very non-lectury but interactive dialogue through small classroom settings like a health class, where we've had professionals come in to kind of um, let the students drive the conversation on why they think it's safe, why they think it's okay, and to kind of debunk those myths so that it's kind of coming from them as opposed to a lecture. So I think there are a number of ways. I would encourage whoever asked that question to visit powertotheparent.org, which is a Westchester-wide kind of coalition of coalitions. There's a lot of resources there and a way to communicate with any specific local coalition that you may want to get in touch with. And with that, I do see that we're running out of time. So I want to share my screen real quick. The QR code you see right there, if everybody could grab their phones, turn on your camera and just point it at that box, link should pop up on your phone to be able to take the survey. We will also be sending a link to the survey with the email with all the resources that Christine has mentioned, along with the tip jar. The survey is very, very short, but it is very valuable feedback for us in terms of informing us on future programming. So we thank you in advance for taking that. I also want to invite you to join us for the second part of the discussion on marijuana, lessons learned and the impact on youth. Smart Approaches to Marijuana, Kevin Sabet, the president of the organization and a former advisor to the ONDCP, the Office of National Drug Control, will be on hand, and he is a wealth of information. So we definitely encourage you to join us there February 10th, and you can register on our website or via the QR code that you see. So thank you again, Christine, for joining us. That was a very informative presentation, chock full of information. I'm glad we'll be able to share it with everybody via the recording. And Carolyn, thank you so much for joining us to answer your questions and offer your expertise. And Mary Beth, we can't say enough about Operation Parent and what a wonderful resource you are to parents nationwide. So we're so happy to have connected. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and we hope to see you in February.
Thank you.
Thank you.